Michelle White, and we have a hot topic tonight. We're talking about Israel, about the war that's going on in Israel, and how it is impacting our communities. And we have some awesome guests this evening. We've got Dr. Keon Payton with New Bethel Baptist Church, and he's also a part of the ITEJ, which we're going to talk about that in the awesome event that they're hosting tomorrow about mental trauma. And we have Eric Bronstein from Scion Group, but he is also a part of what's the other organization that you're part of?
A board member of the Jewish Community Relations Council.
The Jewish Community Relations Council. And then Dr. Bishop Glenn R. Plummer, who's the Bishop of Israel, who lives in Jerusalem, that is here right now because of the unrest that's happening in Israel. He is coming in momentarily. So, normally at the very beginning, I'll tell several community event things. Go to my Facebook page, Michelle Turner White. I'm posting jobs and expungements and all kind of things. The only one thing that I'm going to tell about now, two things. One, if you're going to go to college, registration is now for January. Start looking at that. And then the other thing is if you like orchestrated music, or maybe you've never been exposed to it, or maybe you want to expose some children to it. That is a wonderful thing. It's very stimulating. Do you all like orchestrated music?
Yeah. I used to play violin way back in high school.
Awesome. So the Michigan Philharmonic is going to be at Wayne County Community College District on Saturday, December the 16th at 7:30 p.m. And this is free. Can we say free?
Free.
Michigan Philharmonic is going to be at Wayne County Community College District Saturday, December the 16th at 7:30 p.m. No cost. It's open to the public. Call someone, expose some children, grab somebody that's not been exposed, and orchestrated music is soothing and helps stimulate the brain cells. So you can give them a call at area code 734-374-3200. Again, the box office is 734-374-3200. So we're gonna hop right in here so that we can talk, because we know we got people that'll be calling in, and we thank you for tuning in to Community Updates and Enlightened Hearts podcast right here on WJZZ, and you can catch us every Wednesday from 6 to 7 p.m. on Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, Twitter, and other top social media platforms. And please don't forget to like, subscribe, and share when you go to our Facebook page. And we've got wait a minute, I got to stand up and give my friend a hug. I haven't seen him now. How long have I known you? Don't be patting me on my back like you don't know me.
Good to see you again.
So great to see you.
Hey, I know you gentlemen know this gentleman. I've known him
Yes.
for about 55.
So we must not be live.
Yeah, we're live.
Are we really live?
Yes, we are. Yeah, we're good. We're good.
Okay.
I don't normally stand up for the people that come in a little tardy.
I'm deeply honored.
Okay, you should be.
I'm honored.
So anyway, we're gonna get right into. Let's talk about a little bit of the history. Everybody does not understand. We see the fighting going on, and we hear Gaza, and what's happening, and the fighting, and the children. So we're just getting started,
Okay.
and I'd like to people need to have a little bit of understanding. So we only have an hour, a little less than an hour. Who wants to chime in first about a little bit of the history of what's going here? Now, I just had shared how you live in Israel, in
Right.
Jerusalem.
Right.
And you've lived there for 3 years now, Bishop Plummer.
Yep. My wife and I have been there now 3 years and a few months.
Okay. And you had to flee the area. Well, you were already here when the war started, correct?
Yes.
But your wife was still there and had to, there was a no-fly situation, but she's fine now.
Yes.
Wonderful.
So historically, I think it's important for folks to understand what the real. Let's scoot over here. I'm good.
Okay. I'm moving to the left a little bit. Glenn Plummer is also the owner of the Christian Television Network, and it's the first black television station in the world.
Christian
Christian
I think
station.
WGPR has that distinction.
But the Christian station.
Yes.
Okay.
We
All right.
can't see Bishop. We want
Oh, I
Bishop
see,
to
yeah.
scoot over a little bit. also.
Oh, I see.
We could have
He was
everybody on
looking, he was
camera.
looking at me.
Video and audio.
There we
Yes,
go.
it is.
All right.
We are live,
All right.
and it always is funny to me. I tell everyone before they're coming on that we're live, and it's like they don't hear me. So we're live. But go ahead and tell us a little bit.
So I think you know, in context, what is the fight even about? You know, some would say it's about land. I would argue against that, but that's certainly a part of the discussion. So let me start with this. I noticed that you, Michelle, you had put out a flyer, but you changed something. And
Where I had
yeah, but and that's relevant to what we're talking about now, because I was curious when you sent something that said corrected, and I compared the two to see what was corrected.
okay.
And what I noticed was initially you said it was a war against Israel and the Palestinians, and then you changed it to it's a war between Israel and Hamas. And now I don't know what other change was there, but that's the change
That was
I
only
saw.
Jane.
Yeah, and so to begin with, that's the perception that many people have, that this is a war between Israel and the Palestinians. This is a war between the Jews and the Muslims. This is a war between, you know, these two people groups, and that's just not correct. It's with Hamas, who is a terrorist organization in every sense of the word, and beyond that, they are sworn from the very beginning to the annihilation and destruction of Israel. So, and that's really not the start, but at least that's a start to understand who are we talking about. These are people who are not fighting for land. These are people whose fight is to destroy Israel. Now, the Palestinians, on the other hand, you know, they have a fight about land and so forth, and some other, of course, significant pieces to it. But I think that one would not say that the Palestinian people as a people are sworn to the utter destruction and annihilation of Jews and Israel. I think that most people would agree, no, they're not, that's not what they're committed to. Hamas, on the other hand, absolutely committed to the destruction and the annihilation of Israel as a nation, and basically Jews as a people, but certainly Israel as a nation.
You know, Bishop Hummer, I appreciate that observation, and I think the tendency to look at any conflict that involves any Israelis and any Palestinians as the Israel-Palestine conflict, as if it's a zero-sum equation. That's part of the tragedy of the situation. Of course, the human tragedy that affects individuals is much worse, but part of the morass that all of us need to break out of is the idea of viewing that situation as if one wins, the other loses, and it's a zero sum, right? And it's true that there's going to be a lot of issues that would still remain in conflict, even if, God willing, there could be a complete true peace, and there could, let's say, be two states living side by side peacefully, which is part of the very clear policy of our U.S. administration.
But not the policy of the Israeli government.
Right. Well, we should talk about that, and that is part of the perception problem. It's driven by real things, which is that the government coalition that Israel has had for on and off, but mostly for the last couple of years, has tilted more and more rightward and has caused a lot of people to give up hope for that outcome, and that's a longer discussion. But in the broader historical context, there's actually a lot of reasons for hope. It's just for the last several weeks that has very sadly been kind of buried under the rubble and under the bodies of victims. Hope for a broader reconciliation between Jews and Muslims, between Israelis and Arabs, even between eventually Israelis and Palestinians throughout that land. When we recognize, as I actually would say that a lot of the Muslim countries that participated in what we call the Abraham Accords from the last few years, and Israel, as a lot of people know, was getting very close along with Saudi Arabia, kind of a significant leader in the Muslim world, of a normalization and economic integration that President Biden was pursuing, And that's still out there. That's obviously on the back burner for the time being. But that's part of my point, and I appreciate Bishop Plummer saying this, is that this current war, as horrible and ugly and tragic as it is between Israel as a country on one hand and a terrorist group inside of Gaza called Hamas, that sponsored primarily by the Iranian government, that is effectively holding not just hostages that they took on October the 7th, but also holding that entire population effectively hostage to their radical agenda, and it doesn't have to be that way. And anything that's good for the Palestinians is not bad for Israel per se, and vice versa, right? And once we all can look at that conflict as not a zero-sum equation, I think there's a lot more hope for finding a win-win.
Okay. So, Dr. Payton, I know you were on social media and you had done trying to get us to do a ceasefire,
Sure.
to get them to do a ceasefire. And so what do you see as something that can be done to help calm this situation?
Well, thank you again, Michelle, for your gracious invitation. It's always a joy and pleasure being with you.
Oh, thanks.
And certainly tonight to be in the company of these distinguished gentlemen. I do also appreciate what Bishop Plummer shared, and also what Eric has brought out. For me, I think that, religious fundamentalism and nationalism have always been two terrorist groups. I think that when we have conversations where we're driven by religious fundamentalism or even nationalism, it begins to divide our basic humanity.
Mm-hmm.
Before we were Jews, before we were Muslims, before we were black or white, we were human beings. And I think that when we approach this from a place of our basic humanity, and we look at this conflict and this crisis, I think we have to have an honest conversation which uplifts the themes of truth, reconciliation, and healing.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a lot of healing that needs to transpire for both groups.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly, as relates to the establishment of the State of Israel, I like to start with the healing of the Palestinians who were in that land, in that Gaza Strip, in that region, for hundreds of years, and did live peaceably with their Muslim and Jewish and Christian brothers and sisters in that community for a number of years. I think that when through efforts from the international community, and primarily the Western influence that we know from the establishment of the Balfour Declaration, which called for a state of Israel much sooner than the trauma and tragedy of the horrific Holocaust experience during the 1940s. I think that the Palestinians, they have pain that I think needs to be recognized in the displacement of thousands of Palestinians who had been living in that homeland for many, many years.
And these are Palestinian Christians?
Yeah,
or is it a mixture?
Primarily
there's
Islamic.
a small minority of Palestinian Christians.
Okay.
There are some Palestinian Christians, and I didn't mean to interrupt you, Pastor Payton, but there is primarily the Palestinian community is Muslim.
Correct.
So I have a direct quote from one of my colleagues. As you all know, I work in education. And so this is from one of my Muslim colleagues. And she said, I want you to quote me. She said, how can you have any type of faith or belong to any religious group, but you have to first be a decent human being, and that's the fundamentalism for everything.
Sure.
We have to be decent human beings.
And that's why I started with our humanity, and I talked about the harm and injury to the Palestinian community in the establishment of Israel.
And her name was Shaq.
Okay. But it comes into intersection with the trauma and pain of the Jewish people, who we know lost millions of lives in the Holocaust. And I think in a moment of pain and suffering, everyone can empathize with pain and suffering, potentially, or all the more when that pain and suffering has been exacerbated. And certainly with the Holocaust, it was a horrific incident which caused the empathy of the world to say that we have to do something to protect these human beings who are not being treated as human beings and are being annihilated. And I think that was the proper response of the nations and the world to come and rally around the cry of addressing the basic humanity of our Jewish brothers and sisters. And I think that now the conversation also needs to be had is how do we respect that and honor the lives that were lost in the Holocaust, while also really having the restorative justice question of what do we do to make whole these Palestinians who have also endured injury as a result of their displacement from the region.
So if I can respond a little bit to that, so that's fine, but this is the reason why there's a confusion among normal people that this is a fight for the Palestinians. The what's missing in a lot of these conversations and statements is Hamas.
Mm-hmm.
Who is Hamas? What did they do? What brought about this war? And so I think it's important to bifurcate, to separate, to understand the bigger discussion that you raised about the Palestinians and homeland and so forth, and why are we even sitting here today, and what caused the war. It's a war. It's a straight up war, and there are now tens of thousands of people who have been killed.
Sure.
And so, here in Detroit, there is a congresswoman who I think she was censured, if I'm not mistaken. Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib. Mm-hmm. She was censored by the Congress,
That's
including
right.
many Democratic congresspeople. Why? Because of some of the stuff she's saying. What's missing in her dialogue is condemnation of Hamas. Like, now maybe you guys have heard her, but I haven't heard her condemn Hamas, identify Hamas and who they are, what the wrong is of what they did. Instead, she's changing the dialogue, and she's kind of one of the leading voices in America to confuse the issue.
I disagree, though, Bishop. I respectfully disagree. I think that
you have heard her condemn Hamas?
I have. I've heard a number of persons with a very significant influence within the Islamic community.
Yeah, but I'm talking about her. I'm
talking
talking about her.
I will actually. This may be the first and last time that I come to the defense of Representative Tlaib, but just yesterday, the U.S. Congress voted on a resolution, and it's a resolution. It's not binding law, but it's a very significant statement. And actually, the original sponsor of that was Representative Stevens from Haley Stevens from Oakland County, condemning Hamas and the atrocities that they committed, the terrorism they committed last month, and it passed by unanimous consent in the House of Representatives just yesterday afternoon, including Representative Tlaib. That is
after she was censured.
Yeah, I understand that, and I'm not. I don't disagree. We can talk the politics of whether it was worth a congressional censor,
Exactly.
but I think her statements prior to that were worthy of criticism. But I will say that she, in the same session she voted present, but not in favor and not opposed to a separate resolution about kind of the legitimacy of Israel and its right to exist generally. But at least as to Hamas, she didn't vote against that, so I'll give her credit for that.
I do want to hear Pastor Payton. I do want to hear Pastor. No, this is mine also.
Well, so I will just respond, Bishop, because something was already on my mind in the direction of the conversation we were having, and that is, I mentioned it in my preliminary remarks, and that is religious fundamentalism and nationalism creates dangerous pathologies. And we know that when people sustain trauma, when people are in situations where they are in fight or flight mode, survival mode regularly, that in their bodies, in every human being's body, our bodies become full of cortisol. And the stress levels that we have in our bodies impact our brain. In fact, toxic stress changes the architecture of the brain and literally rewires how people think. And so if I'm a child and I'm born in a community where my family has been consistently telling me about the Holocaust stories, then when I experience October 7th, I'm going to go into a mode of being triggered by trauma. Not only lived experience of those who lived during the Holocaust, but also the intergenerational transmission of trauma for those subsequent generations who have heard those stories. And similarly, if I'm on the Palestinian side and I'm hearing the stories of families being displaced, my family always living in oppression, my family not having adequate water resources, food resources, the real apartheid-like scenario that many of our Palestinian brothers and sisters are living under those conditions, that can create dangerous pathologies, particularly when we haven't gotten to the root of understanding what have caused those adversities, those structural adversities that then cause people to behave in ways that, according to researchers in current day neuroscience and epigenetics, we know how not only the brain is impacted by trauma, but also how our bodies and our brains are developed from the things that we endure. And that's why I go back to, for me, having this conversation in truth is one where we recognize our basic humanity and how we're impacted by the traumas that we sustain. And truth is the starting point of acknowledging those roots that we often don't want to talk about and address in order to get us to a place of healing.
Well, and that's all fine and good. However, there's a big but here for me.
Wait a minute, before we do that, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I need to do a station ID too.
Please.
So I want people to also call in. I've talked to Palestinian Christians and talked to Muslims, and they wanted to chime in. So anybody who wants to call us here can call us at 313-355-6018. Again, you're watching us on WJZZ, and you can catch us every Wednesday from 6 to 7 on Facebook, Instagram, Twitch, Twitter, YouTube, and all streaming platforms. And again, we thank you for tuning in to WJZZ Cool TV. Bishop Plummer, so also yesterday on the news they were talking about a bill to deport all the Palestinians, but where would they be deported to?
Yeah, I can't answer that question, of course, but I can, and we can get back to that. But I think that Reverend Peyton brings up a tremendous point. You called it religious extremism and nationalism. My main responsibility in Israel, as the Bishop of Israel, is I officially represent 6.5 million Black Americans, the Church of God in Christ.
6.5 million.
Yeah.
Do the Church of God in Christ.
Yes, it's the largest Black church in the world. Now, in addition to that, I unofficially represent Black America because there's no other Black leadership who's really over there concerned about or representing us.
Absolutely.
Okay? And one of the things that is important for me to do for the Israelis, especially and particularly the Israeli Jews, is for them to understand we understand
Sure.
as a people. And you don't really, what I found is American Jews have a whole lot more understanding of our history and appreciation for our history. Israeli Jews do not.
Sure.
For the most part, Israeli Jews don't have a clue
Absolutely.
as to who we are as a people.
Apart from what they learn on television.
Well, that's right, and which is skewed and all this. And so in our case, our testimony as a people is that it was religious extremism and patriotism among white supremacists,
There you go.
Ku Klux Klan,
Yep.
but more specifically, the white church.
That's right.
And
right.
I may expand that to white evangelicalism.
Amen.
Okay? Now, so we as
We call it white Christian nationalism.
yeah, same concept.
But it's
That's right.
all-
Because
you
we
agree with this?
I'm much less qualified than these gentlemen. to speak on it.
yeah,
But I'm an ally, so I'm learning while
yeah,
listening.
but here's the point, okay, is that we as a people, we had our own internal conflict
Sure.
on this very issues, on these issues that we were facing as a people.
Sure.
It didn't have to do with the Jews, didn't have to do with Palestinians, it had to
Chicago.
do with
The killing
come
in
on,
Chicago.
Come on.
Are we together?
Detroit, down south,
That's right.
you name it, okay?
And Fox News will say, why are you killing why all the violence?
Yes.
Without addressing the
Correct.
traumas.
But here's my point. We agree up until a certain point.
Okay.
Okay? Our people and this is my message to Israelis. Our people, we as a people, black people, we had an argument going on within our community between, let's just say, one group being led by Dr. Martin Luther King, black Baptist pastor. Another group, religious, black Muslims, Malcolm X, Elijah Muhammad. A third group, secular, Black Panthers.
Absolutely.
These folks, okay?
Yep.
So I would say there were three mindsets.
Sure.
Okay. The third group, in my opinion,
The secular group that you mentioned?
yes, the secular group came into prominence and power in education today.
Sure.
As opposed, but Dr. King, at the end of the day, he won the argument. And his argument was nonviolence.
That's right.
The other guy's argument is, by any means necessary,
That's right.
take up arms and let's fight.
That's
now,
right.
both groups were
Let's
traumatized.
defend ourselves. The Black Panthers were not so much let's be terrorists and kill people, but let's take up arms to defend our communities.
Okay, I agreed. But Dr. King's point was very focused, and that is, it's through nonviolence.
That's right.
You will prevail through nonviolent means.
That's right.
Whether you want to define it as defending, being the aggressor, it doesn't matter. At the end of the day, he argued against put down the arms.
That's right.
That was his point. Not even to defend ourselves with arms. And so they beat us, and they killed us, they hung us, they did all these things. But what was the result at the end of the day? And this is our message to Israel and to the Palestinians.
That's right.
It is through nonviolent means
That's right.
that we as a people prevailed, and look where we have. Look what has happened to us as a people.
Amen.
As a direct result of taking the preacher,
Yep.
taking the black church road of nonviolence, as opposed to the black Muslims or black secularists, and so I hear that on the undercurrent of what you're saying, and I hear this same discussion today. That
1,000%.
it's rising again, and I'm on the side of a Dr. King.
That's right.
I'm saying it's non-violence.
That's right.
I'm saying that to the Palestinians. We understand your plight. But we say to the Jews, we understand your plight.
Sure.
We understand oppression.
That's
We
right.
know what that feels like.
That's
We know
right.
what it smells like from afar off.
Yep.
You don't even have to act like, we don't have to see you up close, and we smell you coming before you even get here.
Exactly.
The Jews have the same testimony. The Jews know anti-Semitism. You don't have to see it up close. You know what it smells like.
Sure.
You know it far off. That guy just, he's hiding it within, his frame of speaking. And so if I had anything to deposit, it would be, let's look back historically of what happened to us as a people, because that's our testimony
Right.
to Israel.
That's right.
And to Palestine.
Absolutely.
The Palestinians.
We're together. And the only thing that I would say to that, and I think Eric should weigh in, and that is, the Palestinian people and the Israeli people would be a whole lot better off without Netanyahu and Hamas. And I think that when we can continue to have the conversation about nonviolence and about addressing the truth about what has happened historically, that will be the framing of what can really, in my opinion, be a very positive conversation leading toward a two-state solution.
I think, I think that goal is one that we all, ultimate goal of peaceful coexistence in that land. Nonviolent existence in that land is something that at least all of us sitting around this table certainly share. I will say I don't think it's necessarily appropriate to equate, although there's reasons to criticize both for completely different spheres, with Hamas on one hand and Benjamin Netanyahu on the other hand. I have my own criticisms as well, because he's proven over recent years to be an increasingly kind of divisive political leader. But he's still a democratically elected.
He's not calling for the annihilation of a people.
And
We're
yes, and
together.
he sometimes uses rhetoric that I personally find offensive as well. But again, that's different from.
And his war tactics have killed a lot of people.
But you just did. So you're right. So you compared Netanyahu to Hamas, and I think you were right for
The
calling
development of the
the Reverend out on that, because
Yeah.
that's see, this is where the it's like throw up dust in the air, blue smoke and mirrors. To me, it's not a comparison, even though we may disagree a lot with Netanyahu's policies, his positions, whatever, okay, to compare Netanyahu to Hamas, I think, is not just a stretch. I think it's deceptive, and I think it's wrong, and I say that respectfully.
Well, and respectfully, and I receive that, and thank you for keeping me honest. I absolutely, let me clear the record. So there, in my opinion, there is absolutely a difference between people who say, I want to see you annihilated, and are working every day to make that happen, and people who may not say that, but through their policies and through how they interact with you, it's implicit.
We have the same argument about Trump. Okay,
absolutely.
I mean, you would argue the same
discussion
thing about Trump.
is being had about
right?
Trump.
But I wouldn't compare Trump to Hitler. I wouldn't compare Trump to somebody trying to.
Trump has often been compared to Hitler.
Yeah, but let me take that. Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, no, please.
I'll take that analogy one step further, because unfortunately we see, amidst the passion of people and the genuine concern of people, seeing innocents caught up in a war and seeing non-combatants as civilians suffer and die. Naturally, people are going to protest, and this is where the demand for things like ceasefire, it's an understandable instinct. It's worth taking a step back or so. But even when it comes to using the Donald Trump example, as much as a lot of people in the United States, and I'm certain a lot of people in the black community were very put in a very uncomfortable place, and in a place of protest against Mr. Trump and a lot of the policies, that didn't invalidate the legitimacy of the United States of America, right? Not only for us as Americans, but for foreigners.
And that's the point I was trying to make.
Yeah, and President Trump had policies that were very adverse, and I think a lot of people would argue discriminatory, and some would say racist against migrants and immigrants and refugees coming to the fore.
He defines himself as a nationalist. So,
Okay.
I mean, the guy.
Yeah, but that wouldn't mean
But
that.
a lot of people love Donald Trump.
Well,
as well.
and I understand that, and that I wasn't meant to go on a soapbox about Donald Trump. But even in the height of those policies, and we had children being separated from their parents at the border and so forth, and a lot of us were very offended by that.
Structural adversity is what you're naming.
And yet, that certainly would not have legitimized or even given any of us a thought to justify if, say, Salvadoran migrants who were, refugees and trying to escape persecution were to mount a terrorist attack across the border and kill civilians and take them hostage. We would say, well, absolutely not. The United States would do whatever's necessary to prevent that. That you separate those. And unfortunately, and it's frustrating, and for the Jewish community, I will say, around Metro Detroit, and I certainly read a lot nationally, are feeling a little bit under assault also, because what sometimes has bled into justification or even support for not just for Palestinian rights, but for the actual terrorism, for the actual cause of war, and the denial of, and you see it unfortunately in protests, and you see it in demonstrations and so forth, of people who, okay, it's one thing to say we want a ceasefire, or we can talk about why that may be premature, but people want to end the Jewish state, right? They want to eliminate Israel, and we get into the comments you mentioned from the representative who had the censure was partly because of using this phrase, from the river to the sea. They say, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. And we know as Jews, what we know that means is free of Jews. It means essentially not only the destruction of Israel, but we saw, unfortunately, a terrible preview on October 7th of when the people who are eliminationists, when the people who are not interested in nonviolence, when the people who are dedicated for religious fanatical reasons to the complete elimination and destruction of any Jewish presence in that historic Jewish homeland, we see what they do when they're given the means. And that, unfortunately, requires Israel to maintain a lot of vigilance and a defense which is not always nonviolent at all. And then you end up with innocents being caught up in the crossfire. And that's exactly what we have seen in the last several weeks. And the question, if we can all, and I think we have the luxury, because none of us sitting here are threatened immediately by that. We're not in a war
He
zone.
lives in Jerusalem.
I think I probably, arguably, would have a little bit more
Okay.
to lose.
Yeah, I agree with that, and you're absolutely right. And by the way, it's a longer discussion about Bishop, what you have done both for the Israeli people and African Americans in respect to your position, which I respect tremendously. And I know it's not the topic of today's conversation, that you had to suffer through some resistance from some elements in Israel who believed you were there to, convert people.
I wouldn't call it resistance.
Okay.
I underwent straight attacks
There you go.
by Orthodox Jews
Yeah.
who ultimately thousands online wrote horrible things about myself and my
Yeah.
wife, and it moved up to physical threats, threats of assassinating us. The police had to get
By
involved.
Orthodox Jews.
Yeah.
Yes,
Mhm.
and
Threats of assassination.
yes, and
Well, what is that if that's not religious fundamentalism?
I
It is
agree.
really-
In
that
Israel.
is.
No, it's these.
And
That's
weren't there some other
that's the same-
organizations that were threatening you too?
Well, but
They were smaller.
no. So the ultra Orthodox community would probably say that Eric is not even a Jew.
Yeah.
Is that true?
They might.
Are
They
you-
might.
where
I'm
are
not
you-
religious enough, right?
Well, where are you at? Are you in the Orthodox community?
I grew up in a modern Orthodox / conservative Jewish household, and
But right now you attend synagogue?
yeah, I'm a member at a couple different places, but I would probably fit in what they call conservative part of
All right.
the Jewish spectrum.
So the ultra Orthodox, they don't even acknowledge conservatism.
Correct.
Okay, I've been there to hear them say people like you are not even Jews.
Right.
Okay, and so that group, they don't just come against me as a Black American or me as a Christian leader. They come against him.
Right.
And the Reform Jews, oh my God, they violently want to go. They want to go against them violently.
Right.
So I don't want to cast aspersions on the Jewish community because of the extremist they're not even nationalists, by the way.
No, actually.
They're against. They're the opposite.
Right.
They don't even believe that Israel should be a nation. They're waiting for
Some
the
of them.
Messiah or
Some of
something.
them, yeah.
Okay, but they are clearly religious extremists.
Right.
And I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No,
but
no.
I just
I
wanted
never
to-
had since that happened to you, because we've known each other on and off a long time, and I never had a chance to speak to you since that time. But
Yeah.
it bothered me to read about what you went through. I didn't know it was as bad as you just described.
Yeah.
So I don't have the privilege to apologize on behalf of those people, because they wouldn't give me that. They wouldn't delegate me for that. But to the extent that I can, on behalf of people that love you and care about you,
Thank you.
I regret and apologize for what you had went through. And Reverend Payton talked about intergenerational trauma, and without excuse, and it's a very good point, but without at all excusing that behavior that you just described, not even slightly excusing it, there's this inherited intergenerational, if you want to call it trauma, against a couple thousand years of Jews being persecuted,
Right.
particularly by
Christians.
the Catholic Church.
Well,
and then
no,
later
they
by the
say
Reformed
Christian-
Church.
Yeah, but they
just
say Christians.
I understand. I understand the difference.
Right.
To
They
a
don't.
degree. They do not.
They don't know
recognize
the difference between a Baptist and a Catholic
don't.
and a Pentecostal.
They don't.
It's just the Christians. They persecuted us,
That's
and
right. And they see Bishop Plummer from the Black Church of the United States coming to Israel, and they could presume
convert-
he's trying to convert the Jews.
To
proselytize.
And yet we all know that wasn't true.
Of
But-
course
and
it
I'm not
wasn't,
making an excuse, but that triggers, and Reverend Payton, you said, like, that can trigger a response that we might all find, horrible and offensive, sitting here in the isolation of just a pleasant conversation.
Sure.
And in any event, you, Bishop Plummer, bring an interesting perspective, because you suffered through all that, and you didn't say, away with Israel, right?
Right.
You didn't throw away what you see as the larger relationship because there's some extremists.
Yeah.
And I think the same needs to be true if it can be done in any amount of security, from the Israeli perspective relative
Exactly.
to, let's say, in the Palestinian population. It's tragic that, at least with respect to Gaza, and to a lesser degree, thankfully, with respect to the Palestinian Authority, which is essentially a different government that provides a civil governance in the West Bank. and there's a lot of problems there too, but it's not nearly of the degree of what we've been seeing right
Sure.
now in Gaza.
You may be interested to know that the leadership of my denomination and church called me after consulting with and being involved with the two Michigan U.S. senators, Gary Peters
sure.
and Debbie Stabenow, and Israel had locked down. This was during COVID. Israel had locked down, so 6 weeks had gone by, and Ben Gurion Airport was closed. And because of the threats against us, he called me and said, "Listen, we're going to airlift you and your wife out of Israel for your safety."
Yeah.
And I said, "Bishop, don't do that. This will push us back, if not 10 years, 20 years, the work that we've been doing." He says to me, he says, "Doc, they're trying to kill you. They're trying to hurt you." This is he, Senator Peters, Debbie Stabenow, and U.S. diplomats in Washington,
Sure.
D.C., trying to talk me into leaving. And this was in February 2021. And because this is so important and urgent for us to be a blessing to both Israel, to all of the residents of Israel, we opted not to do that. And so I do have a different kind of a perspective on this. Not only was I personally attacked, I was there in 2021 when 4,000 rockets came from Hamas in Gaza while I was living in a town called Mevaseret Zion, which is a suburb right outside of Jerusalem. My neighbor was a speaker of the Knesset, and my wife and I had to run into our bomb shelter in summer of 2021. Now I live in the middle of Jerusalem. My immediate next door neighbor is a Palestinian Muslim. We are so close. Our family, we love each other. And we have had the greatest relationship. And it has given me a broader perspective. I live right in the center of Jerusalem, a place called Malka, which is where the big arena and the stadiums and the biggest mall is. All right. And so I live maybe 2 blocks from that mall. And so I've lived next to a Palestinian lawyer who's defended Palestinians at the Supreme Court level, and I've lived next to in another town next to the Speaker of the House. And so I've had an experience, that few probably haven't. And I'm like the third wheel. I'm like the guy that, I'm not a Jew, I'm not a Muslim, I'm a Christian, and they kind of almost both want to look at me like, why are you even, as a matter of fact, I'm asked a question all the time.
Yeah,
Why are you here?
All the time. And for me, it's a rude question.
Bishop, just know that you're not the only one that experienced that. Yeah, I actually met Eric when I was a regional executive for APAC.
Yes.
And that's a word that people, they don't like to hear APAC right now.
Yes.
Tell us what APAC is.
The American Israel Public Affairs Committee. And I was leading a delegation of African Americans from the Midwest in Tel Aviv. And going into a restaurant, we were egged.
No kidding.
Yeah. And so when
By
you talk about triggers,
by Orthodox Jews or by Palestinians?
by some kids in
But not
who
Palestinians.
pulled up. No, we were in Tel Aviv.
Yeah, but it could have been Palestinians.
Could have been, but
Yeah.
it doesn't
But it
sound
probably wasn't.
But the trigger
I've never heard that story.
of we hear the stories of treatment, and many of us who are African American live in black skin. We know it every day,
Come on.
right? So when we go to a place like Israel and we're the only black group, and somebody pulls up to us, opens the car door, and throws eggs at us,
Yes.
then that's what a number of us felt,
Yes.
in that space. I think the point of uplifting that is that there needs to be a recognition that human behavior is consistent regardless of the population or the people that we're talking about. There's going to be levels of extremism on all sides.
Right.
And I think that the responsibility of the government is to make certain that people are safe. And I still am a supporter of Israel and believe that we should advocate for a strong Israel, but also a strong U.S.-Israel relationship because we have provided a substantial amount of resources over the years in order to ensure the safety of the Israelis from those 4,000 plus thousands of rockets that come in every day. The Iron Dome and many other things that we can sit here and talk about that have been given from U.S. taxpayer dollars to ensure the safety of the Israelis. And that's important in this discussion because a part of the conversation is everyone is scratching their heads about how October 7th even happened. What was the intelligence failure?
Yeah.
What were the problems with the government? Was it? Nobody wants to say that Netanyahu, clearly would not have been responsible for the death of 12,000 people. But some people have to also ask the question, what happens when no one from your intelligence can explain how they even got over here in the first place? So when 4,000 rockets are being launched every day, think about the catastrophic calamity that those rockets would have and the number of deaths if that were to be the case. So, but and I don't like talking about numbers of deaths, because any one death is too many. But to the extent that 1,200 persons were unfortunately killed in that horrific act that we all know is, for the Jewish community as a whole, the worst since the Holocaust, it is atrocious that occurred. But at the same time, we cannot overlook the blatant failure of the financial resources that many of them are U.S. taxpaying dollars that go toward ensuring the safety of Israelis. And in light of that situation, I keep uplifting pathologies, because when people are triggered, people don't always respond in the most rational way. And I think that is my criticism currently of the Netanyahu administration, why I vehemently reject this notion that we have to kill Hamas at whatever cost necessary. What is the cost? How many lives have to be lost in going after Hamas? How many more hospitals have to be blown up, and there's no real substantive evidence that Hamas was there when the attack occurred? And to the extent that
wait, they weren't where?
Well,
in the hospital, there's been
No, they were under the
underground
hospital.
tunnels.
there's some discussions going on right now about the legitimacy of whether or not they were actually.
But now we're down to about our last 7
I'm sorry.
minutes.
I wanted to say one thing to Reverend Payton, who I love. There's an alternative to a war of destruction, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right now, Israel feels they're in a war of necessity to protect themselves and their lives. But there is an alternative. I don't know how realistic it is, and that is Hamas, which is, again, the Palestinian non-combatants in Gaza and Israelis are both victims of that terror group. The alternative is they could surrender. They could leave. They could put down the. They used to say, there was a common saying that if, and they'd say that Arabs, and it's not fair anymore to say this, but they used to say, if the Arabs would put down their weapons, so to speak, there would be peace. In other words, the Israelis had no design on conquering their neighbors.
But to your point,
and
you're
if the
saying
Israelis
Hamas
did, they'd be
just
slaughtered.
needs Hamas needs to just surrender and stop.
Yeah, and I'm not holding my breath that that's going to happen tomorrow. But I will say that there is some effort, early effort, by some other parties, the governments in Egypt and Qatar, to actually try to achieve a solution like that, where Hamas would be extracted completely from Gaza, to relieve that population of who's essentially holding them hostage,
But then
so
there's
that
still
Israel wouldn't have to make war any further on that.
But there's a question after that.
Yeah.
Let's assume that happens.
Yeah.
Then what happens in Gaza with these 2 million?
Well, that is a great
Palestinians?
question.
And I just read today a comment from a former Israeli Prime Minister, Olmert,
Yep.
who said that he is calling for NATO or some other foreign country, conglomerate to come in temporarily, but for a period of time with UN oversight, to take over until the Palestinian Authority is strong enough and willing, because they're not willing to
That's
come
a
in.
great
Well,
idea.
they have right.
I thought it was a great
I think
idea
it's
too.
a great idea.
That, a solution.
Before
yeah,
we
please.
go, I've got somebody to just say, give that number again.
Okay, go ahead.
313-355-6018. But one of the things that I would like to, I think I appreciate everybody's comment. We've discussed the war in kind of in depth, but how is it affecting? Now, a couple of things I can see how it's affecting our communities is the trauma that we're witnessing on television. And all of this is causing increased prejudice against whatever group that's living in the United States. It might be Palestinian, it might be Muslim, and they're being ostracized or things are happening to them. But how can what does true reconciliation